Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first Thomas Ashton Institute Lunch and Learn session. It's lovely to see so many of you joining us. For those who might be new to the Institute, the Thomas Ashton Institute for Risk and Regulatory Research is a unique partnership between the University of Manchester and the Health and Safety Executive, bringing together research, regulatory insight and expertise to improve workplace health, safety and wellbeing. Today's session focuses on managing violence and aggression in retail, an issue that's becoming increasingly important across the UK workforce. And we're delighted to be joined by Professor Sheena Johnson and Dr. Cara Ung, who lead the Institute's Violence and Aggression Research Network and will be sharing their research and introduce the practical guidance they developed in collaboration with the Retail Trust. I sent everybody a quick email before the session, but I'll just go through the housekeeping one more time. The session is being recorded and we'll share the recording and slides afterwards via YouTube, but to help encourage open discussion, the recording won't include the Q&A. If you have questions at the end, please use the Q&A function in Teams and we'll pick these up at the end, and we'll also invite people to unmute if they want to and ask questions live. So I'll hand over now to Cara and Sheena to get us started, and thank you both for being with us.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your lunch, especially during a heat wave, to listen to us talk about something particularly cheery. So I'm going to start the presentation and I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Hopefully everyone can see a PowerPoint shared. I'll take silence as a yes. Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for taking your time to join us on Thomas Ashton's very first Lunch and Learn, where we'll be talking about managing violence and aggression in retail. So just a quick overview of the session today. We'll try to make it quick, about 30-35 minutes, to make sure there's time for discussion, interaction, and questions. So we'll do a quick introduction about the research team and about VARN, which is the Violence and Aggression Research Network. Then we'll talk about setting the scene for violence and aggression in retail, its impact on employees and organizations. And then we're going to move on to talking about the best practice guidelines that we developed alongside the Retail Trust. Okay, excellent. So first, a bit about us. So Sheena, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly?
Happy to. So first of all, hello to everyone and thanks for joining us. So I'm Professor Sheena Johnson. My research area is broadly work psychology and wellbeing. I'm particularly interested in kind of wellbeing, stress and health. And over the last, I would say, 8 years or so, I've been particularly interested in violence and aggression, and the reasons for that will become more apparent as Cara explains the background to the study. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. And as you all know, my name is Dr. Cara Ung. I'm a senior lecturer in organizational psychology at AMBS, and I work in the same group as Sheena. My main research area is on why people do horrible things to each other. So I study workplace mistreatment, bullying, harassment, and aggression, and how it affects various, employee outcomes like well-being, performance, attitudes, emotions, things like that. And this project has been supported by Dr. Lynn Holdsworth, who is a research associate for the project. And all of this research has been conducted under the VARN network. So before we talk about what the VARN network is, we want to get to know you all. So if possible, could you please scan the code in the QR code here, or enter the following numerical code on menti.com. So this will all be available. So I'll give you guys a few minutes to do that. And then, but in the meantime, I'm just going to put this live. So start presentation. Oh, people are already doing this. Excellent. So we want to know our audience, which industries or which sectors are you coming from? Are you an academic? So I see some academic colleagues here. Do you work for local government, the police, or do you represent a professional organization? So we'd be very curious to know. So you can join. I'll put the link to join in the chat as well. Okay, so police, a big part of our audience, which is great. museums.
I can come in there as well, Cara.
Yes.
Just, I think one of the reasons we're interested is because obviously today we're talking specifically about the work we've been doing in the retail sector, but the VARN network itself covers a much wider range of sectors, and we've done a number of workshops over the years that's explored different sectors and sort of having a look at the cross-sectoral similarities and differences in terms of exposure to violence and aggression. I just think it'd be really interesting to see, first of all, who we've got here today, but also whether what we talk about resonates the same across different sectors. So yeah, I can see we've got quite a range here, which is really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for providing context, Sheena. I'm very bad at filling the silence during these things, but thank you very much. And okay, so I think we have a good proportion, about half of the people in the chat answering this. Next, we want to know about just the prevalence or the significance of violence and aggression in your workplace. So this could be an issue that employees experience, or it could be a significant issue that your organization wishes to address, or both even. So we want to kind of see how this is contextualized for the audience. And we can talk more about this during the question and answer. Excellent. So I assume that for police, it's probably a mix of both, you know, tackling it in a professional manner and then also experiencing it and trying to understand your employees' experiences. I can imagine it's the same for local government as well. Okay. We have some more people joining. Well, I think this is a really interesting, just live cross section of what people are experiencing. And obviously it sounds like violence and aggression is a significant issue for many people, either professionally or experientially. So hopefully this is something that we can build upon in our presentation. So I'll move on to the presentation if that's okay. And thank you very much. So back to my screen, my PowerPoint. So as I said before the Menti poll, all of our research has been conducted under the Violence and Aggression Research Network and the Thomas Ashton Institute. So VARN is a collaboration between the Health and Safety Executive and the University of Manchester. So we're bringing academics like Sheena and myself in collaboration with practitioners and specialists from the HSE to help identify and develop policy-focused research to address kind of cutting edge, kind of very real practical problems that workplaces are facing, with a particular focus on violence and aggression. And the VARN network is a place for organizational and professional representatives from across a variety of sectors to learn and contribute to research, so collaborating with us academics and or with the HSE. And it's also a place for people to get together to understand and raise awareness about work-related violence and aggression, and to share best practices on how to reduce and prevent it in different kinds of workplaces. So as Sheena said, we've held workshops in the past across various sectors like social care, local government, civil enforcement, to try and understand organizations and employees' experiences and what commonalities and learnings that people can take from each other to help understand and reduce violence and aggression. Okay, is there anything that I should have that should have been added, Sheena or Helen?
I think that's fine. We will, at the end of the presentation, have a link if people are interested in joining, but we'll get to that, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so now we'll get into, I guess, the meat of the presentation where we talk about violence and aggression. So when we're talking about work-related violence and aggression, we're using the HSE's definition, which defines work-related violence as any incident in which a person is threatened or assaulted in circumstances related to their work by members outside of the organization. So this is very important. This caveat is very important. Within our research project here, we're interested in members outside the organization mistreating employees. So these are people like customers, patients, members of the public, clients, things like that. We're not looking at people within the organization mistreating each other, even though that is a real and pertinent issue. Okay. And workplace violence and aggression has really become an increasing area of concern over the past 5 or 6 years, especially due to COVID lockdowns and the cost of living crises, kind of increasing awareness of the experiences of particularly frontline retail staff. So you may recall in 2020 and 2021 during the COVID lockdown, there was a real increased awareness of frontline workers experiencing different, increased and new types of mistreatment from the public, and this has kind of continued on even as lockdowns have ended and COVID's kind of shifted into the background. And we have quantitative data to support this. So the British Retail Consortium reported that in a recent report said that they receive about 1,600 incidents of violence and aggression a day in 2025 and 2026, and this is almost 3 times as much compared to the same report done in 2019 and 2020. So 1,600 reports daily versus 455 reports. We still think there is a degree of underreporting in this, and we also think that figures may be skewed by people just being more aware of customer violence and aggression and just being more comfortable reporting it. However, we think these trends are still very consistent and a cause for concern. A recent USTAW survey, so that's the Union for Shop Assistants, found that 90% of respondents were reported being verbally abused in their work, with 9% being physically assaulted sometime in the relatively recent past. And this is corroborated by a report by the Association of Convenience Stores, which found a 40% increase in incidents over the past few years. And more worryingly, a quarter of these incidents involving weapons. So there's not only a change in the frequency of violence and aggression experience, but also the nature in which they are experienced. And as we can obviously understand, violence and aggression has a real human cost to the employees experiencing it. So academic research, including our own, has consistently shown that mistreated employees report worse outcomes. So things like they report worse well-being, they are less able to perform well in their jobs, and they are less happy. They're not as happy in their jobs. So they report lower levels of job satisfaction. And alternatively, they report more of the quote unquote bad stuff. So they're more likely to feel burnt out, to engage in absenteeism, so not showing up for work because they just feel too ill to work, and they're more likely to consider leaving their current job or leaving the sector altogether. So there's high turnover and turnover intention. And what Sheena and I found in our workshops when speaking to organizational representatives is that the effects of mistreatment don't just stop at work. We found that some employees reported a disruption in both their non-work and their work well-being, especially in small communities where retail workers may see their aggressors or perpetrators within the community when they're going about their personal life, which is also very distressing. So this creates kind of a moral case for understanding and preventing workplace violence and aggression. But, talking about the business case, there is also a real tangible cost of violence and aggression, with a recent report finding that violence and aggression costs UK retail over £235 million a year. So this could be lost productivity, turnover, the costs of correcting turnover, early retirement, things like that. And so you can see that there is a real tangible cost associated with violence and aggression that only adds to the moral and the human cost of it. And our research also found that violence and aggression tends to be quite normalized in retail, in that people feel as though they're not comfortable reporting it, even if it does affect them. So something that's come out of our workshops is that verbal abuse over physical abuse is often experienced to be the most damaging because it's more sustained, it's more subtle and psychological, and it's often swept under the covers. So based on these very real practical concerns, Sheena, Lynn, and I began collaborating with the Retail Trust over 2 projects. So the Retail Trust is a UK-based charity that seeks to aid retail workers and retail organizations in promoting employee well-being, so psychological well-being, financial well-being, and to promote better working practices. So some colleagues and we've done some research looking at the effects of violence and aggression through members' surveys. And following on and building on from that, Sheena, Lynn, and I helped to develop best practice guidelines as part of a Respect Retail campaign launched by the Retail Trust. So this Respect Retail campaign really kind of developed as a response to the increased level and nature of customer mistreatment. So you can see an ad for the poster campaign on the right. And we decided to work with Retail Trust to try and understand, what learnings can we take from different organizations, big and small, and what can we kind of synthesize to help retail organizations generally to combat, understand, and prevent violence and aggression at work. So we conducted several professional interviews with members of one of Retail Trust's steering groups to understand kind of their experiences with dealing with violence and aggression, how they addressed it, and any challenges that they faced. And so the outcome of that is this wonderful set of best practice guidelines that Sheena will talk about right now. And we'll go over I think we're just going over just a bit, giving you a teaser of the guidelines, but we have a QR code that you can scan and a link that you can click if you want to download the guidelines yourself after the presentation. So Sheena, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Cara. Do you want to go on to the next slide, and I'll just go straight from there. So I think Helen has already just put the link to the guidelines in the chat for the call today. So if anyone wants to just access them, they are free. So yeah, you can just download them from that link if you want to. We'll also share it at the end. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of what we cover in those guidelines. So as you can see on this slide, it's a 28-page free report. We cover a number of different areas. So we talk a bit about the background, some of which Cara's covered, but more detail in relation to retail. So what are the challenges? Why is it important to look at this? And then we talk about what the impact of workplace violence and aggression is on employees and staff and on the organisations themselves. So covering things like the health impacts and the organisational impacts as well, in terms of things like absenteeism, recruitment, turnover, and on all of that. So there's a lot of detail on both of those in the guidelines. We then have a section that talks about what are the legal obligations. Right, so there are legal obligations for organisations to protect and support their employees. So we kind of summarise that, and we provide links and information. Organisations obviously are aware of this, but it's useful to kind of have everything in one document. I think probably what I think is the most useful or the most interesting part of it is the kind of the retail tips. So what is it that we've learned from these interviews and discussions that we've had, and from the research that we've done over the years, in terms of how violence and aggression can be either tackled to some extent, or if it can't be changed for whatever reason, how do you support employees? What sort of things, what steps can organisations take to ensure that they are doing everything within their powers to help to protect and support their employees? And that's what I'm going to pretty much kind of cover today. We also provide resources, so you'll see when you download the guidelines that there are a number of different links and information that you can go to other external resources to find out more about that awareness raising, understanding and tackling workplace violence and aggression. So we kind of took everything that we've done over the last few years. So in terms of the workshops, the interviews, the surveys that we've done, we specifically conducted interviews with Retail Trust members to talk about their approaches, the challenges, the areas, what do they do that works, what do they do that hasn't worked as well, what's been their kind of learning journey. And we've really just tried to consolidate all that into a relatively short report. 28 pages for an academic is not bad, and there's lots it's not all text, trust me. Okay, so do you want to go to the next slide, please, Cara? So we created this retail framework because we love a mnemonic, So what is it? It's a nice, easy to remember framework of the different areas that we think are important. And under each of these key areas, we created a page or a couple of pages within the guidelines that really talk about what are our tips. What are the takeaways? What are the key points that we think it would be useful for organisations to consider and to think about maybe implementing to try and create this kind of change in better understanding and hopefully ideally in terms of reducing violence and providing better support. So you'll see there we've used the retail mnemonic for obvious reasons. So we've got these 6 areas. So I won't read this all out, but it's like make sure people are reporting, engage with people, find out the information from the people who are being impacted, how to tackle it, when is it appropriate to tackle it, what are the different solutions that can be maybe put in place. That assist, that support thing is really important as well. So if incidents are happening, and we know there are, Cara's just shared 1,600 incidents a day, what can an organisation do to help to ensure that their employees feel supported after an incident? So if you can't prevent it, what can you do to try and make sure that people feel that they have the support of their organisation and their manager? Inform is about really kind of sharing information, and that might be sharing to other organisations, but also sharing with your employees, because that's, again, another really important step. If we want people to report incidents, from a psychological point of view, if you want me to report an incident and I do that and then I never hear anything again, it's going to deter me from reporting an incident in the future. So it's that kind of feedback loop. So people feel that they're being heard, they're being supported, they're being told what is happening as a result. And that doesn't mean that you're solving the problem necessarily, but it means that people feel listened to, and that is also really essential. And then finally, the L of the retail mnemonic is about learning. So how do we evaluate and ensure that we know what is happening? If we put an initiative in place to try and make things a little bit better, is that working? How do we assess that? Most of these, it is retail specific for obvious reasons, but most of these tips are really adaptable, both across different types of retailers, different size. We do acknowledge, we talk in the guidelines about the difference between large organisations and smaller retailers, but many of these tips I think are cross-sectorally relevant as well, so they can be applied and considered in many different contexts. Okay, do you want to carry on? I'm going to go through just 2. I'm not going to go through each of the 6, all right, because you don't want to listen to me talk for too long, and you can obviously just have a look yourself and feel free to ask questions at the end. So I'm going to look at the R, which is the reporting part, and then the L, which is the learning part. So we'll start with report. So as Cara's already mentioned, there is quite often a kind of cultural belief within many different organisations that violence and aggression is just normalised. It's part of the job. So people don't often always report incidents. What that means from an organisational perspective is you don't really understand the problem. You can't understand the problem because you're not receiving all the information about it. And to put it bluntly, you can't solve a problem if you don't understand it. So the very first step really is to encourage reporting. That will help you to understand the challenges, to understand how prevalent workplace violence and aggression is, and where you might be best placed, put in resources and time to try and get the best return on that investment in terms of trying to reduce and support people, as we've mentioned. So I won't read all of these tips. I want to make sure we've got time to have a discussion at the end. But I'll just go through a few of them. So that first one there, make sure that you have accessible and consistent reporting measures. So some organisations have multiple different ways of reporting things. So whether that be by talking to your line manager or reporting something online or doing it in a paper form, ideally try and have systems that are as simple as possible. Right, so whatever might deter people from reporting, whether it's too difficult to access the paperwork, or you can't get that meeting in with your line manager, or you don't understand the technology or the app that you've been forwarded to. All of these are things that might actually prevent people from telling you the information that you really need to know. So try and have simple reporting mechanisms, and try and make sure that these are explained and accessible to people so they know where to go. It's easy, it's quick. Give people time to report as well. Don't rely on people reporting things outside of their working hours. That's another, a clear deterrent to people actually reporting. Other things like helping staff, so training people in terms of making sure they're familiar with the type of work they're doing, and paying particular attention to people who perhaps aren't working full time, because they may miss some of the messaging that's going out. So if you've got part-time or temporary staff, it's important that they also are aware of this. And there are different ways of doing this, and it will vary. What is appropriate will depend on your organisational setup, but it might be line manager down, talking in meetings. It could be messaging via email or other kind of technology. It could be notices up, and whatever works for your organisation, but make sure that people know what it is that they're doing. That idea of encouraging staff to report incidents, that's really important. So you want to change that culture of it being just accepted that you might get an aggressive customer, you might get shouted at, you might, experience this aggression, and you just get on with it. It's just part of the job. You want to really try and say, no, that's not okay. We want to know if that happens. So encouraging people. And that can be done in a number of different ways as well. But ideally, you want it to be led from the top. So you want your senior leaders to be giving the messages important all the way down to your immediate line manager, and your colleagues also supporting you in doing that. I've already mentioned about giving people the time. There are other things depending on the sector. So emergency numbers, for example, if people are working night shifts or irregular shifts and there isn't maybe other support available, you might want to have other routes of reporting there. Capturing incidents we mentioned there as well. So a lot of retail organisations use CCTV, for example. Some retailers are bringing in things like the body-worn cameras. As an aside, we've got another study that's looking at body-worn cameras. If anyone's interested in that, you can come back to us on that. But that idea of capturing the evidence is really important. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, I think, Cara, thank you. So I'm skipping all the way down now to our last letter of that mnemonic, so that the L, which is learning. So it's not enough just to gather the data, right? You can gather as much data as you want, but then if it just sits on a computer or sits in a file somewhere and you don't evaluate it, you don't look at it, then it's not being helpful to you. So how can you learn from that information? So one of the key things to do is to try and evaluate the incidents and their impact. So try and follow up on what's happening. And then if you're collecting data on it, you're keeping track of the data, and then you might put things in place to try and reduce that, whether that be a different type of tech or a different working pattern or whatever it is that you're putting in place. You're going to want to know whether that is working. All right, so you can do that by trying to keep track and look at the kind of the pattern of reporting that's happening. So you see in the blue box here, you can look at things like as incident reports, have they increased or decreased? Now, it's worth reminding, I think, that if you are changing the culture, you're trying to encourage people to report incidents, then it's likely you'll see an increase. That doesn't mean it's happening more. It just means you're capturing the evidence, you're getting the data. Over time, though, you can watch the trends and see whether that, dips and changes, increases, decreases in relation to things that you're putting in place. You can also look at things like, has the type of incident changed? You can talk to your staff members, maybe a staff survey, try and gather information from them. Do they feel safer? Do they feel better supported? Do they think certain approaches are working? There might be other information that you can draw on as well. So things like customer complaints, so this is information that you're likely going to be gathering anyway. So you can review these and see if these change as well over time. So things like looking at the metrics, looking at how frequently you review the data, considering what sort of changes have been put in place, and then trying to follow those patterns over time. There's one last point there that I'll just touch upon. So that idea of training. So training came out as really important. So making sure that people are aware of how best to respond and react to a situation. So what is it that you expect your staff to do if they are put in a situation where they are exposed to violence and aggression? Are they aware of, do they have the skills to deal with that? Do they know how to react, how to maybe deal with sort of conflict management, how to de-escalate a situation? Do they know who to go to for help and support? What are the steps that they're meant to be taking? And all of that requires, good training, but for everybody, again, I just briefly go back to that idea of the difference between full-time, part-time, ad hoc staff. Really, everyone needs to be accessing that training. So most places will offer some training. Is it working? Do you evaluate that training? Do your staff feel that that's relevant? What sort of feedback are you getting? Is it possible that different types of training could be more successful for you? Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, I think we're getting close to the end. So this is just the resources. So we mentioned previously that we do provide links to all of the resources. So I can't read that text, and I'm sure you can't either, but you can have a look and sort of follow those links to a number of different places to find out a little bit more. And we do the same as well in terms of the legal obligations that we mentioned previously. And I think if we go to the last slide, we're pretty much on time, which is good. So I just want to thank everyone. I know I've gone quite quickly through that, but I didn't think you wanted me to just talk you through the entire 28 pages. Please do have a look at the guidelines. We've put the link there for you to access those. You can either click the link or scan that QR code. Think about if you're interested in joining our violence and aggression research network. We'd be really happy to have additional members in there. We are an active group, and it'll give us a mechanism via which to keep you in touch with the research that we're doing. And I think I will leave it there and allow some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Sheena. And if you're interested in, participating in research with your organization, or if you have any questions that you're curious about, we're always happy to talk. So please contact us through the Thomas Ashton email address provided at the bottom.